Look around this room right now. In the next 60 seconds, your brain is going to make a subconscious decision about whether you are going to pay attention to me or drift off into the comfort of your routine. And here is the terrifying truth. Most of you have already trained your mind to choose the drift. Look at your hands. Look at how you sit. Right now, your autonomic nervous system is broadcasting your level of commitment to every single person near you. When you slump back, when you fold your arms, when you glance away, you aren't just sitting, you are running an evasion script. It's a biological survival mechanism designed to conserve energy and keep you safe from the discomfort of growth. We call that script an excuse. An excuse is the slickest, most dangerous psychological magic trick your brain performs. It takes a failure of discipline and repackages it as a reasonable choice. You tell yourself you're tired. You tell yourself the timing isn't right. You tell yourself the market is bad, your boss doesn't see your value, or your background held you back. But if I wired you up to a polygraph right now, your heart rate, galvanic skin response, and pupil dilation would tell a completely different story. You don't believe the excuse. You just prefer the safety of the lie over the pain of accountability. If you leave right now, or if you mentally check out in the next 3 minutes, you will go right back to that quiet, comfortable routine of self-deception. You will keep wondering why other people seem to command respect, control their circumstances, and hit their goals effortlessly while you stay stuck in place. I am going to break down the exact biological mechanism behind why your brain manufactures excuses, how to spot the microscopic microbehaviors that are quietly sabotaging your authority, and the exact 3-step psychological protocol to eliminate excuses from your life permanently. If you tune out now, you leave the lock intact. Stay until the end, and you get the key. The choice is yours. But make no mistake, whatever you choose right now sets the standard for how you handle every hard decision for the rest of your life. Every single day, human beings walk through the world executing subconscious patterns they never consciously chose. They believe they are making deliberate decisions, but in reality, they are reacting to internal discomfort. When the standard gets high, when the pressure turns up, or when effort is required, the baseline human response is to manufacture a reason to quit. We call it an excuse, but in behavioral science, it is a cop-out disguised as logic. An excuse is nothing more than a psychological airbag. It deploys the moment you sense impact, cushioning your self-esteem so you don't have to face the hard truth. You fell short because you chose comfort over discipline. You cannot hide an excuse. It shows up long before you open your mouth. It shows up in a shifted weight, a dropped shoulder, a micro-expression of hesitation, or a break in eye contact. When you allow an excuse to take root, your physiology reflects it. You lose presence. You lose authority. People around you sense it instantly, not always consciously, but deep within their primal nervous systems. They know when they are dealing with someone who owns their reality versus someone who blames their environment. When you blame external factors, the economy, your past, your lack of resources, your genetics, you are making a catastrophic trade. You are trading your power for temporary comfort. The second you say, "I couldn't do it because of X," you give X complete control over your life. High-performing human beings operate under a completely different psychological framework. They don't have better circumstances. They have a non-negotiable standard. When things go wrong, and they will, they don't look outward to find a scapegoat. They look inward to find the gap in their strategy, their discipline, or their execution. They understand a fundamental principle of behavioral mechanics. What you tolerate, you validate. If you tolerate one excuse today, your brain will generate 3 more tomorrow. It is a trainable habit. But accountability is a trainable habit too. An excuse is not a passive thought that simply drifts through your mind on a bad day. It is an active, highly efficient neurochemical defense routine designed by your brain to protect your ego while systematically destroying your momentum. To understand why excuses are so addictive, you have to look at the architecture of the human nervous system. Your brain was not built to make you successful, happy, or fulfilled. It was built to keep you alive, safe, and comfortable. Survival requires energy conservation, and growth requires energy expenditure. Therefore, whenever you face a situation that demands high cognitive load, emotional risk, or physical effort, your amygdala registers that discomfort as a threat. Instead of letting you consciously experience the pain of failure or the burden of responsibility, your brain immediately deploys a coping mechanism. It manufactures a logical-sounding narrative, an excuse, that absolves you of blame while keeping your self-image intact. This process happens at a subconscious level in fractions of a second. You don't consciously decide to give up. Your brain presents you with a prepackaged justification that feels entirely real. You tell yourself that you are too tired, that the timing is wrong, that you lack the necessary resources, or that someone else ruined your momentum. In reality, your neurochemistry has hijacked your logic. It releases a chemical release of relief the moment you accept the excuse, rewarding you for stepping back into the safety zone. This creates a powerful neurological feedback loop. Every time you accept a reason for inaction, you reinforce a neural pathway that equates surrender with safety. Over time, this becomes your default baseline. You become hardwired to seek out reasons why things cannot be done, rather than protocols to execute them. The true danger of an excuse lies in its invisible cost to your personal momentum. Momentum is built through micro-victories, the steady accumulation of small, kept promises to yourself. Each time you execute, despite friction, you reinforce internal authority and build self-efficacy. But an excuse acts as a sudden, sharp break on that system. It breaks the momentum cold, setting your progress back to zero while convincing you that the halt was out of your control. What makes this so insidious is that it feels rational. An excuse never presents itself as cowardice or laziness. It presents itself as prudence, timing, or fairness. You convince yourself that you are being strategic by waiting, when in truth, you are simply succumbing to a biological delay tactic. When you allow this neurochemical defense mechanism to run unchecked, you surrender your agency to your circumstances. You begin to view yourself as an object acted upon by the world rather than an agent shaping your environment. Your brain stops looking for solutions because it has already found a comfortable exit strategy. Breaking this cycle requires you to recognize the physical and psychological onset of the defense routine the exact second it begins. You must learn to separate the instinctual urge for comfort from your conscious capacity for choice, treating every excuse not as a valid reason, but as a biological signal that you are standing precisely at the edge of growth. Long before a cop-out ever forms into words or passes through your lips, your physical body has already announced your surrender to everyone in the room. Human beings are constantly broadcasting their internal state through an unbroken stream of nonverbal cues, microbehaviors, and physiological shifts that operate entirely below conscious awareness. When you decide, even on a deep subconscious level, that a task is too difficult, that a standard is too high, or that an excuse is acceptable, your autonomic nervous system immediately reflects that retreat. Your posture sags by a fraction of an inch. Your shoulders tilt inward to protect your core. Your eye contact flickers away a split second too fast, and your respiratory rate shifts into a shallow, protective pattern. These microbehaviors are the involuntary leaks of a compromised mind. You might tell yourself that you are fully committed, but your body betrays your true posture long before you ever articulate a rationalization. True presence and authority do not begin with grand statements or aggressive declarations. They begin with the relentless, unyielding audit of these subtle physical tells. Most people go through life completely oblivious to the signals they are projecting, unaware that their habits of comfort have seeped into their muscle memory. When friction appears, the body naturally seeks a physical baseline of low effort, slumping back into a chair, crossing arms as a physical barrier, fidgeting to discharge anxious energy, or breaking gaze to avoid direct accountability. Each of these micro movements is a micro excuse. It is your physiology attempting to downshift its energy output and protect your ego from the strain of total engagement. When you permit these involuntary behaviors to run unsupervised, you train your nervous system to accept compromise as a default state, telegraphing weakness to colleagues, competitors, and subordinates who process these subtle cues instinctively. Commanding your environment requires you to gain absolute mastery over this physical feedback loop. Behavior drives psychology just as much as psychology drives behavior. When you consciously intervene in your own micro-behaviors, forcing your spine straight, stabilizing your gaze, controlling your breathing, and holding a relaxed, dominant posture under pressure, you send an unmistakable signal back to your own brain that retreat is not an option. You interrupt the biological cascade that prepares the mind to manufacture an excuse. Audit the quiet, unexamined moments when you think no one is watching. How you sit at your desk when fatigue sets in. How your body language shifts when challenged by a peer. Or how quickly your eye contact drops when faced with a difficult truth. Every single one of these physical details is either building a fortress of absolute discipline or laying the groundwork for your next justification. By eliminating the physical posture of the cop-out, you starve the excuse of the physiological real estate it needs to survive. You cultivate a nonverbal baseline of high authority that makes self-deception functionally impossible, training your physical self to stand firm in the exact moments where your mind used to seek an escape. Excuses do not materialize in a vacuum. They breed exclusively in the operational gap between your intention to act and the moment of physical execution. That critical space is called friction, and every additional second, choice, or obstacle you leave within that gap acts as an invitation for your brain to derail your momentum. When the pathway from decision to action is cluttered with small decisions, inconvenient setups, or emotional hesitations, your cognitive mind immediately seizes on those friction points to construct a plausible justification for delay. The intention was there, the goal was valid, but the system surrounding the action was compromised by unnecessary resistance. If you rely purely on willpower to push through high-friction environments day after day, you are running a strategy guaranteed to fail, because willpower is a finite biological resource that drains with every single decision you make. Eliminating excuses completely is not a test of moral strength. It is an engineering challenge aimed at systematically stripping away friction until action becomes the path of least resistance. When you design your environment correctly, you remove the necessity for debate. If you have to spend mental energy deciding when to start, searching for tools, preparing your workspace, or negotiating with your alarm clock, you have already lost the battle. Every micro-decision required before you execute drains your cognitive bandwidth and gives your brain time to calculate the cost of effort, generating a custom rationalization for why the task can wait until tomorrow. High performers do not outthink their excuses in real time. They build operational protocols that eliminate the hesitation window entirely. They automate their setups, simplify their choices, and lock in their routines so that execution becomes an immediate, non-negotiable physical response to a trigger. To master this protocol, you must audit your daily life for the exact points where friction creeps in and creates hesitation. Look closely at the tasks you consistently delay or rationalize away, and map out the micro steps required to initiate them. You will discover that the friction is almost always front-loaded at the very beginning of the sequence. Once you are actively engaged in the work, the excuse vanishes. But getting across that initial threshold is where most human effort dies. Strip away every barrier between your current state and the first 3 seconds of physical action. Set up your tools the night before, predetermine every variable in advance, and reduce complex commitments down to immediate, automatic physical triggers. By collapsing the gap between thought and execution to zero, you effectively choke off the supply of time and mental bandwidth your brain requires to engineer a cop-out. When action becomes instant, automatic, and frictionless, the excuse loses its biological real estate, leaving pure, uninterrupted execution as your default standard. Every time you lower your personal standard in private, your subconscious mind quietly logs the compromise and recalibrates your baseline capability downward. You might believe that cutting a corner when no one is watching is a victimless choice, a temporary concession to tiredness or convenience that leaves your overall drive intact. But your subconscious mind does not possess a filter for context. It simply observes your behavior and updates its core identity model of who you are. When you make a commitment to yourself, whether it is waking up at a specific hour, finishing a report, or holding a boundary, and then quietly negotiate your way out of it, you pass a clear internal verdict. Your own word carries no authority. Over time, these private micro-surrenders accumulate into a quiet, pervasive identity shift, where failure, delay, and rationalization become your natural operational state. This internal recalibration alters the way your mind processes challenge, stress, and opportunity in high-stakes environments. The subconscious is an ultra-efficient pattern recognition engine that constantly predicts your performance based on historical data. When you encounter high-friction situations in public or under intense pressure, your conscious mind may attempt to project confidence, authority, and relentless focus, but your subconscious pulls up the ledger of your private behavior. It remembers every single time you hit snooze, every task you left half-finished, and every excuse you quietly accepted when you were alone in the room. This creates an immediate cognitive dissonance, a split between the image you try to project and the identity you have constructed in secret, which manifests as imposter syndrome, hesitation, micro-anxiety, and a sudden collapse of will under pressure. You cannot fake a high standard to yourself. Restoring internal authority requires you to recognize that your private habits are the absolute foundation of your public performance. Every private decision is a vote for the type of person you are becoming, and the subconscious keeps flawless score. If you want to build unshakable self-trust and command deep, authentic authority in the world, you must treat your commitments to yourself as absolute, unbreakable protocols. This means eliminating the concept of off-the-record behavior. The standards you hold when you are exhausted, bored, or completely alone are the only true standards you possess. Everything else is just a performance for an audience. When you hold the line in private, refusing to let a single internal promise slide, regardless of how small or inconsequential it might seem, you systematically rewrite your internal baseline. Your mind learns that when you set an intention, execution is the guaranteed mathematical outcome. This relentless private discipline creates a profound psychological shift. You stop relying on external validation or favorable conditions to take action, because your self-efficacy is anchored in a proven track record of absolute self-mastery. The moment you surrender to the idea that external circumstances dictate your outcome, you effectively hand over the steering wheel of your life to forces you cannot control. Most people spend their entire lives operating as reactive objects, constantly waiting for the weather to clear, the market to stabilize, their energy to return, or the timing to become perfect before they take decisive action. This reactive posture is the ultimate incubator for excuses, allowing you to outsource your failures to your environment while preserving the comforting delusion that you would have succeeded if only conditions were different. Absolute ownership is the violent rejection of this psychological safety net. It is the uncompromising realization that while you cannot control every variable, event, or obstacle thrown into your path, you retain absolute unyielding control over your response, your preparation, your execution, and your emotional state in every single scenario you face. Adopting absolute ownership turns your mind into an impenetrable weapon against excuses, because it fundamentally alters the math of your decision-making. When you accept total responsibility for everything in your domain, including the mistakes of your team, the failures of your systems, and the surprises of your environment, you render external circumstances completely irrelevant to your progress. An excuse requires a scapegoat to survive. Without something or someone else to blame, the excuse simply starves and dies. When an obstacle appears, the mind trained in absolute ownership does not waste a single microsecond asking, "Why did this happen to me?" or "Who is at fault?" Instead, it instantly pivots to a single, hyper-focused operational question. What is my immediate tactical play to overcome this right now? This shift strips away emotional friction and converts every setback into a pure engineering problem waiting to be solved. This level of ownership is not a passive philosophy. It is a relentless, active practice that requires you to aggressively audit your speech, your thoughts, and your default reactions. Listen carefully to the language you use when a project stalls, a relationship fails, or a target is missed. Subtle phrases like, "I didn't have enough time," "They didn't give me clear instructions," or "The system was against me," are subtle leaks of your personal agency, signaling that you consider yourself a victim of your surroundings. Absolute ownership demands that you reframe every single one of those statements through the lens of personal leverage. I failed to manage my priorities. I failed to seek clarity. And I failed to adapt my strategy to the system. The moment you frame the problem as a failure of your own foresight or execution, you instantly regain the power to fix it. When you embody absolute ownership, you cultivate an aura of unshakable authority that transforms how you operate and how the world responds to you. You stop waiting for permission, stop complaining about conditions, and stop expecting the world to be fair or easy. You recognize that fair is an illusion used by the weak to justify inaction, while ownership is the protocol used by the elite to impose their will on reality. By taking total responsibility for your results, you eliminate the very concept of powerlessness from your mind, building a life dictated not by the chaos of your environment, but by the relentless discipline of your standards.